Thank you very much, Walter, and thank you again for sticking to this rather tough timetable. You've already addressed some of the points, I think, that came up in the first presentation, but I'm sure there'll be issues that we can return to. I'd like now to ask Jacques de Jong to comment. As I mentioned, Jacques was a regulator. He's now at the Klingendahl International Energy Program in the Netherlands. Jacques.
Thank you, Leigh. Again, a pleasure and an honor to be here and to say a few words about energy supply security, which basically is the third pillar that only was allowed by Council to be raised in the context of EU energy policy making in 2007. So it is basically the new kid on the block, talking energy supply security, and there are many reasons for that, and I will go into that. But it basically also is dealing with something that Leigh was already referring to. What is the concept of supply security? And I think, in addition to what you said, to make a distinction between the short term and the long term, and of course there are some experiences that we had on short term supply shortfalls. You also have to make this distinction, I would say, between commodity and system. And when you're talking commodity, then it's about oil, it's about gas. And when you're talking systems, it's system reliability, it's generation adequacy. And they all have their different time frames and their different time plans. And when you're discussing supply security, I think it would be useful to try to make this distinction, because a lot of people are talking about supply security, and then it is always difficult to understand what are you talking about? What are you talking about? So I would like to raise basically two issues. I would go into a little bit in the post-2020 framework. Because supply security, and especially when you're talking about commodities, this is not an issue for the European Union in the years to come, so no problem. But when we are looking beyond 2020, and 2020 is not a sacred year, but anyway, you understand, let's say, why I'm saying it's in the post-2020 framework up to 2050. Talking gas, what do we want with gas? Did we forget gas? No, we did not forget gas. So gas is coming back. What is the role of gas? And let's be frank about it. When we are talking gas, the use of gas in EU 27 in the post-2020 framework, we will have to import large amounts of gas in order to get the gas. And let's face it again, pipelines. I applaud the work that Jeff McCall was referring to the political economy of pipelines. But you have terminals. Well, you can build terminals. Yes, we can build terminals, but the basic thing in supplying the EU gas market with gas from abroad will continue to have to come via pipelines. And nobody will build a pipeline in the expectation that there will be somebody one day knocking on your door, please, can I use your pipeline? It's the other way around. It's the other way around. You build a pipeline if you have a contract for the commodity. So it's part of a wider approach to the value chain. Now, if you are an external supplier and if you're looking at the EU gas market and the use that the EU wants to have with gas in the system, well, there are many question marks about that. Now, I am not saying that we will need a target model for the post-2020 period. I'm not saying that we will need a vision for the use of gas in the 2020 period. And I was reflecting on maybe another word, and maybe the nice word to say that is, we might need an EU Energiek concept in order to articulate a little bit more in particular what would be the role of gas, not only in the fuel mix. Oh, well, fuel mix is not for the EU to discuss at EU level. Well, we should explore these possibilities, but also the use of gas in the system, because we're talking about gas to power and maybe even power to gas. And what the result of that will be that much more flexibility, much more volatility, much more flexibility, especially in relation to the role of the intermittents that we expect to increase in the system. Now, this may turn the whole gas industry upside down. When you're talking about business approaches, when you're talking about business models, maybe even when you're talking about market designs, or you're talking about infrastructures, or the regulatory designs, or whatever. So it is about time, and we still have time to reflect on these kind of things. So that would be a very sensible approach to my mind, let's say, to talk along these lines and to try to articulate the role of gas in the energy mix for the post-2020 period. This is one thing, and then I have a final remark, because the zero is there and the chairman is so nice to help everybody to stick to that. Oil. 2 words about oil. Is oil a problem? Oil products. That is a problem that we will have to face, because the balance between diesel and gasoline is to be frustrated. And I have 2 figures to mention, because we are heading for a situation where the relationship, the ratio between gasoline and diesel in 2025 will be 1:3. And we are coming from a situation that relation in 2000 was 1:1. Now, our refineries are producing too much gasoline and too little diesel. Or put it the other way around, our consumers are consuming too much diesel and too little gasoline. Well, this is not a problem, because we can sell our gasoline to the outside market. Well, the major taker of EU gasoline is the US market. Well, in 10 years' time, the US does not need any more gasoline from Europe. Now, this is something also that has to be faced and has to be discussed, and I understand that next week there will be a roundtable with Mr. Gutte on discussing these issues. So again, do not forget oil. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, I would like to now turn to allow Francesco della FLOR from GLE to offer his comments. Thank you, Francesco.
Thanks. First reaction could be just closed and let's go do business to the USA. This is maybe my first reaction. As operator, if only we had thousands of gas producers and the long tradition and history of regulatory development here that we have in the USA. We, on the contrary, we face extraordinary and very exciting challenges, even in the regulated business in Europe. So first, thanks for the invitation. Thanks, Jean-Michel and the team, Pia, Chiara, Annika, and the others. Thanks for inviting us, the gas infrastructure operators. We represent part of the industry stick to the land, or even more in the underground, where our pipes flow, where our underground gas storages live, and where the foundations of our LNG tanks are in place. So, being close to the end of this extraordinary event, I will take advantage of this to comment, to react, not to repeat. Especially, maybe I could have repeated what E-Control has said, what it was, but I avoid to do that. And just concentrating on the delivering the point of view of us, the infrastructure operators. Okay, the role of the gas infrastructure seems to have shifted somehow in the past years, and will go even more in the future, coming and still providing the way to import, transport, and storage energy, because natural gas, to be more and more a flexibility tool. a flexibility tool fully linked to the electricity production and the enabling of the renewable policy to be implemented and making it feasible, coping with this high intermittency. So this is a new dimension of the security supply provided by the infrastructure, gas infrastructure. Gas infrastructure represents a relatively quite small part of total cost paid by consumers. In average, could be between maybe 5 to 10%, completely controlled by the regulators, but facilitates, make it possible competition in the part where the competition must or should be enhanced, just the commodity side, and enables the RES development. Gas infrastructure is a key and paramount element to create the single market. The hardware, as said this morning, even if the software, our network codes, is or has to be developed simultaneously to optimize the functioning of the infrastructure at the market. Achieving the internal market needs the gas infrastructure in place, in particular, the enhancing or the creation of enough interconnection capacity and bidirectional flows. Just the pipes creates the market. Unfortunately, in the US are hundreds of pipes going from east to west, north to south. Here, there are not so connected markets. We do need interconnection capacity between countries. Pipelines, interconnections is really essential and is the sine qua non conditions and prerequisite for the internal market. Remember that the gas flows between countries and the majority of the EU consumption flows through at least the borders of 2 or 3 member states. But it is also necessary to create or enhance import infrastructure to cope with more import dependency in our territory. This import gas infrastructure should be erected in such a way that allows a more balanced entrances to the EU territory from all points, from the north, from the east, the southern corridor, the south, and why not the southwest part of Europe, optimizing, of course, optimizing also the current gas import infrastructure already in place. LNG connect with all the potential worldwide suppliers. All in all, import infrastructure and LNG import facilities contributes to the security supply by allowing diversification of supplies, diversification of origins, routes, and counterparts. And last, not surely least, this is necessary to remind that gas infrastructure business is a very long-term business. The facilities last and provide services for 30, 40, or 50 years, apart from the lead time necessary to build them, notably devoted to the permitting phase. Long-term business needs long-term commitment, either between companies, the infrastructure service providers, and shippers, and or long-term commitments by regulators, by delivering a stable and predictable regulatory framework, attracting the necessary private funds to invest and create the necessary infrastructure, as per yesterday's address by Mr. Durão Barroso and others. Investment in infrastructure and internal market are 2 of the pillars of the recovery of the future of the EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you for highlighting another issue in the debate and another aspect of security of supply, diversity of supply, which I think we could come back to in the discussion. I'd like now to turn to the last panelist, Helmut Schmidt von SYDOW from the University of Lausanne, a lawyer also, so I would expect some legal comments.
Thank you very much. I was very happy to hear this morning when Jorge Vasconcelos told us that Barroso now allows the Commission wisdom to be criticized. And as I'm a professor in Switzerland, I thought, in a neutral country, I thought now I could go ahead. But when I then listened to Jeff McColm, I all of a sudden realized that before being a professor in Switzerland, I have worked for 37 years in the European Commission. I was not responsible for the third package, somebody else was, but I was responsible for the second package on energy, on electricity and gas. And I think there has been slight misunderstanding between internal market policy on the one hand and energy industrial policy on the other hand. That famous Title 12, I'm not fully sure if you've got the right linguistic version. I'm not fully sure. I think it does not speak about an area without internal frontiers, but without internal borders. At least, let's say, in 87, when that title was introduced by the Single European Act, the idea was to abolish all fiscal and technical borders for persons and for goods. The idea of internal market at that time was not to liberalize, to restructure the industry or to lower prices. It was just opening the market. And that's what they tried to do. They postponed the item of utilities, water and postal services, and the item of energy industry, transport industry, telecom, because these were network industry, where very often there were national monopolies involved. There was no sense in opening the market, exposing private companies in one country to the pressure of full free competition, when in the other countries the access was still hampered by monopolies. And that's why we had a common approach, a common philosophy for all those sectors. Not just as Jeff Markham had said that Europe had power, electricity in mind when they did the gas regulation. It's even worse. We had telecommunications in mind. We had transport industries in mind, railways. Telecoms, yes. So the main item for all these, the main philosophy for all these sectors, network industries, is to guarantee the free choice of the consumer, and therefore you need three things. Free access to the grid, to the network, unbundling, certain degree of unbundling. It's different according to the sectors, if the sector plays the game or does not play the game, and a regulator. And a regulatory authority, which is not a regulator, a terminator, a Schwarzenegger, but which is just a competition authority. Normally, competition authorities intervene afterwards, whereas the regulatory authorities in the energy sector and in the network industry sectors intervene already before, checking if the tariffs are done in a non-discriminatory and transparent way. So that's why you can't completely compare these things. So the third package, we called it package because it was gas and electricity, in order not to repeat the error we did in the transport sector, where we had different directives for land, for rail transport, for road transport, for air transport, for inland waterways. The third package is not the root of the problem, but because of the success of the packages, we now see the problems of the energy sector. Why did we do three packages? Because we tried to do it as soft as possible. First package, just budgetary unbundling, unbundling of accounts in order to create transparency. And it's only when we realized that that was not sufficient that we did the second package, legal unbundling, organizational unbundling. And it's only when we then realized that this was still not efficient that we did proposed ownership unbundling, at least to a certain degree. In other sectors, we didn't need 3 packages because, as I told you, the industry played the game. Now, of course, because of the opening of the markets, we then need additional rules on infrastructures, on behavior on the market. These are and on security of supply. These are not done behind closed rules. It started all with the Green Paper of the European Commission in 2000 on security of supply for energy. These rules have been adopted, and there was a big public discussion after the Green Paper. The rules have been adopted in fora. The one is the Florence Forum for electricity, the other the Madrid Forum for gas, where all the stakeholders participate, the producers, the transmission operators, the consumers, trade unions, and not just consumers of gas as an energy. For example, in the Madrid Forum on gas, there's also CIEP, the organization of chemical industry, which is also a gas user. And, of course, all the legislative proposals by the Commission are discussed not so much publicly in the Council, but at least very publicly in the Parliament, and there have been heroic battles in the competent committees of the Parliament. Now, the other point, security of supply. I had first feared that you would speak more about external relations and not about internal market. I'm very happy that you have seen that security of supply is also internal market. There is a problem between the French and the English language. In English, normally security means protection against criminal attacks, whereas safety means protection against unintentional accidents. If a plane flies into an electricity plant by accident, then it's a problem of safety. If it is steered by a terrorist, then it's a problem of security. And that has as a consequence, in French it's just the other way around between sûreté and sécurité. And that normally leads to the fact that in the English language, people, when they speak about security, they think about terrorists and the strategic importance, military, and tend to consider energy security of supply to be part of the common security and foreign policy, whereas I very much agree that it's part of the internal policy. But as we have spoken only about internal policy, which I very much welcome, I should nevertheless add that there is an external part to the security of supply. On the one hand, you have mentioned your very good book, and look forward that it will be published. Today, Mr. Jean-Arnaud Vinois was invited. Unfortunately, he couldn't come, but he has published a very good book on security of supply with Glass and Castell, which you should also read in this context. On the outside, theoretically, energy trade with third countries is trade policy and falls under the competence of the European Union, but as they have never intervened in the past, and as the problem is not so much to protect us against unfair imports, but to see investments to the outside, we need a additional approach. Just to mention the directive which Walter Balz has mentioned on security of gas, but we also have a directive since 2010 on transparency for investments inside the community, but following also with a perspective for investments outside, and a proposal of last July for the information of the European Union on intergovernmental agreements of member states with third countries, because the first problem for us is to know what member states are doing with third countries. And that is important also in order to speak with those third countries on a level playing field as it concerns the investments risk of which Walter Balz was speaking. Just one word to say thank you for the spirit of Florence, which we have experienced in the forum Florence for electricity and the other fora. And I see that the Florence School of Regulation and the European University Institute is continuing that very helpful spirit of Florence. And I'm looking forward to future conferences and future input for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for drawing attention to the external dimension and the new powers that the community, or I should say the union, have in the field of external relations and foreign trade. I'd like now to give the two speakers a chance to react to some of the comments made by the panelists, and then we can open the floor to discussion. So, Jeff?
I guess I would only say that I agree most with my colleague David Newberry down there, that security of supply for any continent somehow depends on markets, particularly when the supply of public money is short and when the decision-making process that goes along with public money is complicated by politics and contending constituencies. What we've done in the States, and I know it's different, every landowner in Pennsylvania owns the gas under his or her feet. That's not the case in Poland. Decision-making is different, institutions are different. Nevertheless, all of the security of supply that we saw was done with private funds, and none of it came out of the public purse. That makes it easier for us to use those markets to get to our supply. I'm not responsible at all for electricity markets. You're absolutely right about that in the United States. But for gas, it's all security on the back of markets. And those markets are built on the back of the strictest kind of regulation of our pipeline infrastructure. There's no looseness or ambiguity of when it comes to unbundling or accounting or transparency or the regulation of tariffs. That's all very strict. But on the back of that strict and long-standing regulation, we have managed against all odds to allow markets to determine who gets gas and where.
Maybe I pick up 2 points that have been raised. One, I think I can fully agree with Helmut that this external dimension is of great importance, and Europe has not done a great job in sort of making sure that in an international foreign energy policy sphere we are sort of doing a great job. Here I think the US is much better. They have a much more consistent international foreign policy energy strategy than Europe has ever managed to do. So that's something that we should aspire to. I mean, we will never be able to sort of project as much power in parts of the world as the US, but we could still do a little bit better. We are spending a fair amount of money on sort of foreign activities, and some more focus on energy would be useful, I think. And one point I kind of forgot in my presentation is this issue of shale gas. I think Europe is currently probably jeopardizing the simplest, easiest, best way to improve security of supply through more indigenous production in shale gas by, well, picking on some of the early eras of the US where, you know, you got natural gas coming out of water faucets, and some pictures of that is tainting the public appearance of modern ways of producing shale gas. And this is, I think, a very serious error we're doing in Europe. And it seems one country after the other is falling into the trap. I mean, only because the first oil drills in Texas were terrible environmental disasters doesn't mean we don't drill for oil in Europe. But it seems we do the same for gas. So this, I think, is a big error. And I'm sure some of the producing countries are sort of opening bottles of champagne every time another country says, oh, we don't produce shale gas, because it will deprive us of an opportunity. So those 2 points I would like to make. Foreign policy, probably a big area of improvement. We'll see how far we get. And I think on the shale gas, I mean, the final sort of decision is not made yet, but currently it looks rather discouraging, and I think everybody who has any influence should think twice, ruling out options that we might have.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now turn to the floor. I see some hands already waving. Mr. Mandia.
I understand that we all agree that security for gas supply means more investment, investment in interconnections, investment in terminals, investment in indigenous gas production. But I would like to understand how is it possible, how can we expect that investors will invest in those domains as long as we project that gas consumption in the EU will be sharply reduced in the coming decades. And if what I think personally we prove to be wrong, we happen to be wrong, aren't we bound for serious security issues in some decades from now?
First, Francisco, you would like to comment there?
Thanks for the question. You went exactly to the point. You went exactly to the point that most of us, the infrastructure operators, we debate with the authorities and we say, listen, we, as mentioned before, we invest for the coming 50 years. And what happens if this roadmap is going to the carbon-free, 85–90% of carbon-free in the following decades? What happens with our investment? Still in debate. We are quite concerned about that. But part of the answer from the point of view of the operators, is just as follows: we see some kind of decoupling between the gas consumption, or the increase of gas consumption, and the necessity of the capacity of the infrastructure. The infrastructure being in place just in case those sources, those not manageable sources, cannot provide the electricity. So this decoupling, so that the question we were speaking during lunchtime was, the point was how we should, let's say, charge the gas infrastructure service through the gas, just through the gas flows, or somehow to the electricity and all the energy sector. So this is an additional challenge we have in our hands.
Jacques, quickly, and then I see Mr. Yes. Lowe.
Maybe very quickly on... Is it working? Yes. It's working, okay. Maybe very quickly on this point that Claude Mendy was raising, because security of supply and security of demand are the two sides of the same coin. So the problem, of course, is at the level of the EU that we do not have a planned economy. The European Commission will never be allowed, let's say, to design a framework where gas demand for the next 20–25 years is determined. So what I was pleading for is trying to articulate a little bit the role of gas in the system, and that could give a signal to investors. That is one thing. The other thing is, it is also useful to make a distinction between investment in new fields, because if you're investing in a new field, probably you need a new infrastructure, let's say, to bring that gas to the market. But when you have, let's say, already existing production ongoing, and I guess you also know, as I know, that once you start a new field, it turns out always that there is more than when you start. So then you have already a flow that is ongoing, and then you have a different investors' assessment in order to continue your production and to supply the market.
Thank you.
Yeah, 3 points. One positive on the EU, the second positive on EU and US, and the third positive on US. It's all positive. First of all, Helmut's right that the first component of a security supply strategy is internal cohesion. And contrary to what was described in 2009, thanks to the developments which Walter has described, when we did the analysis at the end of last year as to what the risks were for gas supply, we only found one out of the 27 member states potentially vulnerable for any new transit problem in the Ukraine, thanks to the issues to the measures which had been taken. And then, with respect to external policy, people always complaining that the European Union is not speaking with one voice, but as a matter of fact, they've signed up time and time again to diversification of routes and diversification of supplies. Now, on diversification of routes, we happen to have one big ally. It's called the Russian Federation. Whether it's Nord Stream or whatever they want to do, they're in agreement with us. They don't want insecurity in transit countries. That's positive. On the diversification of suppliers, of course, we don't have Russian Federation as an ally. But the reason why it will never happen until the private sector thinks it will happen is there must be some incentive for our corporations to bring in Azeri and Turkmen gas into Europe. And in the present conditions, that's not the case. And that's the second thing I want to say, which is positive for the US and the EU. The US situation has been transformed, I believe, not by State Department, but by technology and markets. So shale gas has developed. It has hugely helped the EU in terms of security of supply. Contrary to what Claude has just said, we have no problems about forecasting a very strong increase in gas demand in Europe until 2030 or 2035. The real issue is what happens after that. And it's curious that the countries which are so opposed to the decarbonization strategy are precisely the ones which should be looking at CCS for gas in order to guarantee that future development. My last comment is a question really to the panel. The third package, if we take the US lesson, must be right that we have to be rigorous on things like unbundling. But couldn't we make it a bit simpler for people doing trade across Europe? If they have to book capacity zone by zone, why isn't it possible to do something like Jeff has described that would bring us allies all over Europe, in our own companies? It would bring about what we want, which is suppliers from all over the world doing direct contracts with final customers, hedging where necessary in long-term contracts, making the market work, and doing it in a simpler way at a European level, and not giving the impression that we are a mosaic of 27 Byzantine nations. Thank you.
Thank you for an impassioned statement there at the end. There was a question behind. Maybe we could take that and then come back to the panel.
My name is Eirik Amundsen. I'm with the University of Copenhagen and visitor at European University Institute. I have a question on measures taken to increase the security of supply. And sometimes one hears that the Renewables Directive is, should be seen as a measure taken to increase the security of supply. And I wonder, how does this fit with the definition of security of supply when it comes to reliability? If the increase of renewables are very much linked to, the construction of windmills and so on, that is not very reliable or oscillates in production and so on. That's one point. Another point is that if this means that there should be an increased self-sufficiency, that each and every country should increase their shares of renewables in terms of increasing their capacities, is there not a huge loss then in terms of lost gains of trade here? So these are my questions to the panel.
Thank you very much. I think that raises some of the issues discussed this morning too, on the need for developments in intraday markets and balancing markets, as well as what Professor Bellman's referred to as a grid party, which is probably nothing to do with a toga party, but maybe he can enlighten us on that. So we have perhaps then a few minutes to tie this session up, and I think a number of panelists would like to respond to those last questions and the issues put on the table by Philip Lowe. Yeah.
Okay, maybe to Philip's question about the long-term capacity booking, yes, I think we do need a possibility, an easy way to book long-term capacity, a long-distance capacity, also long-term. And, you know, we have numerous discussions with our Russian friends on those topics. The thing is that in the discussion about the gas target model, we actually asked explicitly this question, and so far the shippers have said, well, no, we don't want it, for multiple reasons which I don't even want to go into. But I think that there will be a solution. The regulators are just working on a topic we call incremental capacity, which is basically saying if you book capacity anywhere in Europe long enough ahead of the time when you need it, you should be assured that it is made available, either through allocating existing capacity or through building additional capacity. So I hope, let's say in a year or a year and a half from now, there should be some legal system in place whereby if I book today capacity from Germany to Denmark for 2017, I would be sure to get it, and it would be up to the TSOs to make sure that by that time it's made available through whatever measures. So there will be a solution. The current problem is that we are really revamping the whole capacity allocation and other systems, so it's a little bit difficult to put that in place if many countries haven't even implemented their entry-exit systems yet, and you have the restructuring of TSOs. So we are changing a lot, so we have a certain unclarity here. Now under renewables, this is more kind of my personal view, I think they are much oversold as supporting security of supply. Surely there is some component of security of supply, and a lot of wind will probably reduce the total gas import needs, but of course they add other aspects of insecurity, so insufficient reliability, and on this self-sufficiency issue, I think this is a big hoax. Sounds very good for sort of populist politics, but the whole internal market and the whole renewable increase will only be possible if we move away from self-sufficiency on a national level. That's clear. It's just, it sounds kind of, you know, homely in a global world that, you know, my little village is self-sufficient in energy, but it's a stupid concept, and it should be sort of resisted by anybody who has, you know, enough understanding that to realize that this is wrong.
Yes, maybe quick things just to say, because in the past a lot of pressure or complaints was put on the TSOs, and I can say that just to bring some optimism on that side, that the TSOs, the infrastructure operators, are well collaborating with the authorities just to go ahead, and just the joke just for the end is that we see how the operators are advancing to the fourth kind of unbundling. You know, at first was the accounting, second was the legal, then the ownership, and now what I think is that most of the operators are in the fourth, is the mental unbundling.
You were talking about me, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
The operators.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Operators.
Well, all I have to say is thank you very much. And with 100 billion euros a year at stake, I wish you the best of luck.
Well, it's now, I think, time to wind this panel up. I'm sure that some of the issues that have been raised here will be discussed in the next session, which will combine the three pillars that have been discussed in the course of the day. And again, the round table, I'm sure, we'll come back to some of the issues. I think for me an interesting message that has come out of the discussion about security of supply for the future has to be based on flexibility, that the systems that we have to be flexible. And to come back to my introductory remarks about hardware, I think that means then we need a legal system that demonstrates the sufficient flexibility, as well as an infrastructure that allows for this flexible use that seems so necessary for future reliability and security of both gas and electricity supply in Europe. So again, thank you very much to all the panel for your contributions, and to the audience. I think most people seem to manage to stay awake, despite the fact the room is getting a little bit warmer. So time to rejuvenate ourselves with a cup of tea or coffee. Thank you.